everyone, Andrew from WiZDOM here with video 3 of What Should I Do Next series. Now, in the first couple of videos, I've obviously covered some of the real basics and considerations in the first video before you really get into situations and what does it mean for the next property deal. And then in the last video, we talked about a starting out position. And in this video, effectively, I just wanted to build on that position a little bit. So all of you who have seen that would be familiar that in the starting out, we had an income of $10,000 and a very modest current available equity amount of $10,000. So we've referred to this one as starting out plus. Essentially, I haven't changed any of the income situations, so that's still quite modest and modest borrowing, but I've improved their current available equity situation to $80,000. So it might be someone that is relatively young, just starting out, and has been really great at saving, but still has a really modest income. Alternatively, could even be someone that has a modest income, has a property, has actually built some equity from capital growth or some other way. And as a result of that, they've gone release some equity from their property and they have available $80,000. Now, the reason I did this was I think it brings in some other interesting deals. So the first important point is, of course, every strategy that we spoke about from a joint venture perspective of a vendor joint venture in the first video, and of course those other cash flow strategies or those low capital cash flow strategies, of course all of those strategies are available in this starting out position anyway. However, I think we're starting to get into a situation here where we could potentially introduce a very low end deal in that individual's own right. So what am I referring to there? What am I talking about? Well, for me, probably the key difference with this situation is this. Now that we have $80,000, we could potentially set aside some reasonable but still quite modest strategy cost. So if we were going to set aside a strategy cost of, let's say, $30,000, well, that means that available to us as deposit and as settlement costs, so government stamp duty and all of those other costs, we now have available 80 less 30 of strategy cost. So that would give us $50,000. And that $50,000 would now translate to, or potentially translate to, a purchase price of around $200,000. Now, the reason that works like that is because if we're going to go and buy a $200,000 property, well, there's a couple of things that we need to put in. There's the deposit. And I have assumed a 20% deposit here, so we're only doing an 80% lend, and that deposit would be $40,000. So of our $50,000, we need to put $40,000 towards the deposit, and the bank will obviously come in with the remaining 80%, and then the remaining $10,000 will cover effectively our stamp duty and our other costs for $10,000. Now, it's also fair to say that, again, young people potentially getting into their deal or someone that needs to stretch a modest amount of money as far as possible, you potentially could be looking at a 90% lend here as well. And as a result of that, the deposit amount would decrease. And it also means as a result of the deposit amount decreasing, you could absolutely increase your purchase price. I think on a 90% lend, it would actually translate to about $333,000 instead of $200,000. So it's true that by leveraging lenders' mortgage insurance and pushing that loan to valuation ratio up higher, you may be able to get into a higher purchase price style property. That said, because of the sheer cost of lenders' mortgage insurance and the fact that this is likely, well, it's going to be a manufactured growth strategy deal, and we want to get into that deal, execute on it and get out quickly, make our money and move on to our next deal, I don't really love the idea of pushing into LMI territory, and as a result of that, having a high cost attached to it. At the end of the day, it just means that the profitability of the overall deal would be damaged. However, I'm not saying it can't be done, and it does make sense in some circumstances. So now we're effectively looking at both. We have a $200,000 or thereabouts ability to service debt from our $40,000 in income, and we've now got a higher deposit, setting aside a strategy cost of $30,000 of potentially being able to buy a $200,000 property. Now, I can appreciate that's a very modest budget. Am I recommending that? No. Or saying that that's really easy? No as well. But there are properties out there that you could purchase for $200,000 and apply, let's say, a $30,000 renovation to that style of property and improve the value of that property overall. Now, the type of property, of course, that I'm talking about is probably likely to be regional. You would be able to buy in a lot of those smaller country towns. You would be able to get into the market at that $200,000 price point or thereabouts. Yes, it's going to need a lot of work. Yes, that's going to mean that there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that are going to need to go into that property. However, the opportunity to be able to substantially improve the value of that property and thus get great profitability out of that deal is really very good as well. So it's fair to say that when we look at that increase in current available equity to even still a relatively modest overall amount, we're already in a situation where we could be looking at modest low-end deals in our own right. Now, do I prefer that over, say, doing a joint venture or a vendor joint venture on potentially a much better style of property in a greater location that's in higher demand? No, of course not. But some people, and it's okay that the people feel this way, really want to start out on their own. They really want to do the hard yards themselves and build that experience and build that knowledge before they work with others and do joint ventures. And that's absolutely okay. This is a way that they could do that. And it would get them into, like I say, a low-end regional renovation or potentially even a very low-end metropolitan renovation. Let's be honest, it's probably likely to be a small unit, which obviously has its own risks attached to it, and we would need to be comfortable with that. But you could be looking at a manufactured growth strategy deal in that modest range in your own right, if your financial circumstance looks like this. Again, what I'm going to say is really important from a cash flow perspective as well. As I said in the very first video, really important to be building up that capital before we're focusing on cash flow. But if you're in this situation, and you do have a reasonable amount of equity available to you or cash available to you, well, then of course you could be considering doing cash flow strategies on the side as well. And it's going to be the same strategies that I talked about in the previous video with the starting out. And that's lease and lease, Airbnb, you could be operating as a deal finder. Those types of strategies are always going to be available to you from a cash flow perspective. With this little bit more money, executive rental might be a bit more interesting because you've obviously got a bit more capital to be able to do that higher end fit out that would be required in executive rental. But there are those cash flow strategies that could be looked at by you. Again, my concern there is that yes, you'll build the cash flow, but of course that doesn't necessarily support your overall capital position. And as a result of that, building your property portfolio and property journey long term. So if you happen to be in this sort of financial situation, there are some additional strategies that you can consider going into in your own right, in addition to looking at joint ventures as well. So hopefully that's helpful for the people in that kind of situation. If you're asking me, I would probably still lean to doing a better deal, a better joint venture, but that's just my personal view. I think the experience that you'll gain from that and the overall profitability would probably be better. But that does not take away from the fact that many, many students across the years have gone out, done this type of strategy and been really successful with that. And of course, built on that and done more of them and built their property journey out that way. So hopefully that's helpful to you. I really look forward to bringing you the future videos around the various different positions as we build that position up and up. And then we tackle a few really challenging different positions as well. Until then, happy investing and bye.